Friday, the sun is shining, and we are going to talk about happiness. Are y'all ready? All right, so I will be honest with you all. The majority of my trainings that I create for you all are things that I've experienced, things that I've learned. Everyone's caregiving journey looks different, but there are some very similar themes in all of our experiences. And so I try to create trainings that, that are applicable to a lot of journeys. And so when I was creating this one, it really was selfishly for myself. Your girl has been on the struggle bus lately as far as happiness is concerned. So I'll just be very honest with you with that. And so this training, the goal here is not to encourage toxic positivity, and it's not to devalue any quote unquote negative emotions we may feel. Really, my goal with this training today is to say it's okay to live a life that cultivates happiness, even when things around you are not making you happy, right? We look at the news for any amount of time, we can see that our world is experiencing a lot of turmoil, a lot of violence, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of fear. And when we look around and we see all the suffering, it's very difficult to say, well, I'm going to feel happy in this space, at least for me, right? How can we be happy when there's so much suffering going on? And that could be outside of your four walls, it could be inside of your four walls. But for people who are empathetic and compassionate and caring like you all are, it can be kind of a challenge to experience full happiness and not feel guilty about it, I think, sometimes. So my goal here again is to just validate you all, as always, and also to give myself and you all permission to cultivate happiness in your lives. So I hope that that point comes across today. And I definitely don't want anyone to feel like you have to slap on a happy face when stuff is getting real, because that's just not going to happen. So that's not the information I'm going to give you today. So let's go ahead and get into it. First of all, we're going to define happiness as best as we can. It is subjective, but there has been some research in the field of happiness, positive psychology. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about the science of happiness. Then we're going to touch on something called the broaden and build theory. And then I'm going to talk about a counting kindness intervention that I thought was incredibly fascinating. So I want to share that with you. Then we're going to go through why choose to be happy, why choose happiness, and what impact does our happiness have on the people around us. So there are three different types of happiness, okay? So there is three different levels, and of course you can't really like pin it down. You can't look up happiness in the dictionary. Well, I mean, I guess you can, but like I said, it's subjective. So you may feel, you may have experienced some of these levels, you may have experienced all of these levels, but these are just kind of, it's a nice way for us to kind of get that groundwork of what we're talking about when we talk about happiness. So level one happiness will represent momentary feelings of joy and pleasure, right? So that is short-term positive emotions, sometimes referred to as simple pleasures. So that could be a good meal, a hobby we enjoy, watching a good movie, listening to a really awesome piece of music that we like, and things like that, right? So it's very easy to observe that level of happiness because of the immediate feelings of joy that we experience. These types of emotions are also pretty easy to measure and compare because we can do brain scans and show that certain parts of our brain are active when we have these emotions. So this level of happiness is pleasurable, but of course, the good feelings don't last for long, and you do return back to your baseline pretty quickly. So you might have experienced this kind of happiness just in your day-to-day of like, oh, I got my coffee just right, or I ordered dessert at, after dinner, right? Somebody complimented your hair or your outfit, right? Those are moments that you can experience happiness, but they are not sustainable long-term emotions, okay? They're very fleeting. So level one happiness represents judgment about feelings. So this is where it starts to become more subjective, right? So this is also referred to sometimes as well-being, and we will talk a lot about well-being in this presentation today. So the second level of happiness is more thoughtful, and it requires an assessment that goes beyond those momentary feelings of level one. So questions about happiness and well-being will normally work at this level. So like if you ask somebody about how happy they are with their life in general, their answer will probably reflect a level 2 reflection. Okay, so that's going to be relative to how we compare our situation with other people, right? Somebody's always got it worse than me, right? And that can kind of make you feel like you've got more well-being or more happiness. And also compare it to how you felt in the past, right? Well, I'm happier today than I was 5 years ago, or I'm not as happy today as I was 5 years ago, right? So many of the studies on happiness and psychology will work at this level. So if you read about research saying, for example, people in country A are more happy than people in country B, it's going to refer to this kind of level 2 happiness, okay? And then level 3 happiness is represented by a higher meaning of life, flourishing, and fulfilling your potential. So the third level of happiness is related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Where self-actualization is at the very top of the pyramid, and underneath you've got like physiological and safety needs, needs for love, well-being, self-esteem, things like that. But the top is this idea of living a fulfilled potential life, right? You're flourishing at this level. And it's more difficult to measure than the other two levels because people high in level 3 happiness, they're going to live more in harmony with their deeper values and have fewer inner conflicts because they often feel that what they do has meaning, right? And it's contributing to a greater cause. So kind of like, you know, if you feel like the work that you do with your loved one, right, there's purpose in that, there's meaning in that, you can find a lot of fulfillment in that because you are living a potential, right? So if you have a life where you're kind of hanging out in this space a lot, scientists will say that you're optimally happy at this level, right? You just kind of have that sense of contentment in your soul, so to speak. So the summary here is towards the lower level of happiness, that's going to be more immediate, sensual, measurable, right? Your sensory feelings. And then towards the higher level, happiness is more rational, reflective, and relative. Okay, so it's very unlikely, if not impossible, for you to be high in all three of these levels at all the time, right? There's a trade-off between the levels in the sense that you can't have high levels of type 1 pleasurable experiences, momentary joys, and things like that, because you're probably not going to work hard enough to reach your potential and succeed in your long-term objectives in life, right? So if you think about living a very hedonistic lifestyle, right, where you're always chasing that physical or sensual pleasure, you're not really investing in long-term happiness at that point, right? But on the other hand, if you spend all your time working towards long-term goals, you'll probably forget to enjoy those simple things in life, right? So we have to find that balance. Finding that right balance to accept the natural ups and downs of life and different levels that are just, you know, part of the human experience. So now that we got the groundwork out of the way, we're going to talk about the science of happiness. So in order to understand happiness and alleviate any, you know, suffering that happens from being unhappy, neuroscientists and psychologists have started to investigate the brain states that are associated with happiness and the components to consider when we talk about our relational or the relation to well-being, right? So happiness is in principle difficult to define and study. Psychologists have made substantial progress in mapping the empirical features, and neuroscientists have made comparable progress in investigating the functional of the brain or the neuroanatomy of pleasure, which contributes importantly to happiness, and it's essential to our well-being. So way back in the day, since Aristotle, happiness has been thought of as consisting at least 2 aspects. So there's hedonia, also known as pleasure, and eudaimonia, which is a life well lived. So contemporary psychology, these aspects are usually referred to as pleasure and meaning. And positive psychologists have recently proposed to add a third component, and that is engagement, related to feelings of commitment and participating in life. Okay, so it remains unclear how pleasure and happiness are linked exactly, but it's safe to say at least that if there's a pathological lack of pleasure, like dysphoria, depression, things like that, that's going to be an obstacle to happiness. So in social animals like humans, it's worth noting that social interactions with other humans is fundamental and central to enhancing the other pleasures, right? So we are intensely social, and data indicate that one of the most important factors for happiness is social relationships with other people. Okay, and I know in a caregiving space that can be very difficult to find, but as we go through, you'll see that being social and being in community is very key to our baseline happiness. So I like this summary here. Happiness springs from the interplay of higher pleasures, positive appraisals of the life meaning, and social connectiveness. Okay. So we're going to move into something called the broaden and build theory. Now, bear with me. This one was very difficult for me to try to condense because, like I said, happiness is very subjective. But I hope that you can get some clarity about what the broaden and build theory is by the end of this. So this was developed by a social psychologist named Barbara Fredrickson back in 1998. And it's associated now with the field of positive psychology, but she originally started the study to see how positive emotions contribute to our survival, right? Why did we develop the need for happiness and positivity and joy and all that? What's the point of it, right? And so this is based on something called the thought action repertoire. And what that means, it is the range of actions that you can perceive, right? The things that you can do and the actions you decide to take, okay? So the theory is that positive emotions do more than cause us happiness, joy, and contentment in the moments that we experience them. They also broaden the behaviors, right? Our capacity for these behaviors, like awareness, play, discovery, and curiosity. So the more positive emotions we experience, the wider the range of thought and action repertoires that we have. So in other words, the happier we are, the more flexible and creative we are. So if you think of it this way, if you have depression or you have someone with depression, the world is going to shrink, right? Social isolation will creep in. You're not going to be able to see opportunities as well. You have a very narrow perception of what you think and of what you think you can do, like the actions available to you. So that's why I have this spiral graphic here, because at the very bottom is a very narrow view, right? And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? If you are in survival mode, right? You're going to be just worried about you, yourself, and your basic needs being met. And that makes sense. That's survival. But the happier you are, the more expanded your possibilities become. Okay. So a negative mood can become a proclivity, which then can become a trait and eventually part of your character. So that's why when we shrink that thought action repertoire, when we shrink that, when we narrow that possibility in our mind for happiness, it's kind of like a downward spiral, right? So over time, when we're happy, our broadened behaviors will help us to build rich knowledge, skills, and ability, also called like personal, physical, intellectual, social, and psychological resources. So these resources will last a lot longer than the initial positive emotion that led to their creation, and it contributes to long-term well-being and success. So we're broadening our resources, our psychological resources, our intellectual and social resources, okay? And that's going to help us cope with stress and unhappy emotions or situations, essentially saying we have a stronger skill set, right? That'll help us to deal with difficult situations. And I don't know about any of you all, but I have definitely found myself at the bottom of the spiral before, and my worldview and my psychological resources, my emotional resources are very, very limited in that space, and it can be very difficult to spiral back up, right? And so really what the broaden and build theory is telling us is that if we open our space up for the cultivation of happiness, right, to acknowledge the good things in our lives, that literally will expand our mind and where we can see more possibilities for happiness and gratitude. So it broadens and then it builds. That's why it's called the broaden and build theory. So positive emotions also produce flourishing. Okay, so that's like kind of when they say we're not surviving, we're thriving, right? That's what flourishing is. So they don't simply within the present pleasant moment, but over the long term as well. So the take-home message is that positive emotions are worth cultivating, not just as an end state in themselves, but also as a means to achieving psychological growth and improved well-being over time. Evidence has shown that positive emotions may not only indicate the presence of resilience, but serve to build as an enduring resource that aids in long-term coping. So it's believed that the effects of positive emotions may compound over time and fuel that psychological state of flourishing. So what I'm trying to bring home to you guys here is that happiness isn't just a fleeting emotion. There is a worthwhile end game to experiencing happiness, experiencing joy. And the more we allow that into our space, the more resilient we become to stress, okay, and negative emotions. So it's about building that resilience over time. So hold on, did I read that slide? Yes, okay, I got it. But make sure I got all the information right. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the counting kindness intervention. And the reason I want to tell you about this is because I think that a good place to start as caregivers, because maybe you don't have a social group, maybe you are kind of feeling depressed, right? These are some things that you can do to start building or cultivating that happiness in your space, okay? So the Counting Kindness intervention, they ask participants to become more aware of their own kind behavior towards other people every day for 1 week. So they're asked to keep track of each and every act of kindness they performed and to report the daily numbers of those acts. And the most important finding that they reported was the close association between kindness and happiness in everyday life. So kind people experience more happiness and have happier memories. So simply by counting the acts of kindness for 1 week, people appear to become happier and more grateful. And if you think about your own lives, how many actions every day are done out of kindness for your loved one, right? You don't have to do the things that you do for them, but you do because you love them, because you care for them and you care for their well-being. So that's kindness. So here, right here, you could start in 1 day. And if you need an excuse to keep track of all the good and wonderful things you do, here's one, right? When you acknowledge your kind acts, it does build that happiness. It starts that broaden and build spiral up, okay? So research suggests that like gratitude, kindness is an important human strength that will influence your subjective well-being. That a reciprocal relationship might exist between kindness and happiness, just like it's been shown for gratitude and happiness. Way back in the day, I did a training on gratitude and how that actually combats our natural nervous system's negativity bias, right? To always be on the lookout for danger, always be on the lookout for something bad that could be potentially harmful for you. And gratitude actually, combats that so that you can see the wealth of wonderful things in your space. Kindness, very similar, is this the same thing, right? It is a great component to building happiness. So if you experience positive emotions and optimal social conditions as a result of your own kindness, that's going to create that upward spiral. So simply counting your acts of kindness, it suggests that that people who score higher on that trait, measures of gratitude, experience greater subjective well-being and more intense positive effects like happiness, vitality, and hope. And as well as fewer negative effects like depression, resentment, and envy. Okay. So some previous studies have also reported that unhappy people are more inclined to rely on passive and negative thinking styles compared to happy people. So have you ever been around somebody who is very negative, and every solution you proposed or every positive spin you try to make, they're just determined to be, nope, I'm mad, I'm negative, right? It's because their ability to see past that negativity is very small, and so they haven't had that broadened perspective. And it can be very difficult to reach people that are there in that space. So now we're going to talk about sympathy, compassion, and empathy, okay? Because I think that we all want to be empathetic. We all have the capacity to be empathetic. Some are more than others. But I feel like defining these 3 terms is going to really help you see that you don't have to be empathetic all the time, and it's probably not very healthy for you to be that way, okay? So when someone's is unhappy, our tendency as human beings is to kind of align our emotional state with theirs, right? And so when a situation is challenging or upsetting, we're kind of taught to sync our emotions up with those people who are suffering. But if you feel happy instead, you're likely going to be judged as unfeeling or self-centered, or maybe you don't even have compassion, right? But you don't have to be unhappy, upset, or stressed because someone else feels that way. If you were a part of my boundaries training, you learned that there's a space where you say, this is me and my feelings, and that's you and your feelings, right? You can still assist somebody without taking ownership of their feelings. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. Okay. So you do have a choice about how you want to feel in those spaces. And choosing to be happy does not make you a bad person. And it doesn't mean that you're uncaring or selfish or self-absorbed. It just means that you're a happy person. So let's see here. We've got sympathy, compassion, and empathy. So it is possible to be sympathetic and compassionate and not be empathetic. You can choose between those characteristics. So empathy refers to feeling what another person is feeling, right? If mom's sad, I'm sad. If dad's angry, I'm angry, right? But on the other hand, sympathy means that you understand what they're feeling, but you don't have to feel it yourself, okay? Okay, mom's upset, I'm still okay, right? Dad's upset, but I'm still okay, okay? And compassion means that you want to take action to relieve that suffering of another person, okay? So you can still acknowledge their suffering and feel inspired to alleviate that suffering with your compassion, but that doesn't mean you have to participate in that suffering with them, okay? So if you're very empathetic, like I am, like most of us are, it is very difficult to feel what other people feel all the time. It's very draining, especially if there's a lot of suffering going on. Even if it's just ambient suffering around you, right? Like I said, I've been on the struggle bus lately because I try to stay informed. I try to stay abreast of what's going on globally. And that stuff's depressing sometimes, right? And so I cannot feel terror when I witness terror, right? I have to learn that my boundaries of my space, my energy stops here, right? But I can still feel compassion and sympathy for people. And that doesn't mean that I don't care, right? It just means that I've chosen to safeguard myself by not pouring into that space all the time, okay? So you can understand what someone is feeling and even relate to it from past experiences and want to relieve that suffering and remain happy, okay? So you are a good person, okay? Too many of us have been taught that we aren't good people if we don't have empathy, but that's not true. It's not helpful or healthy to feel empathy for everyone all the time, right? We're only one well, right? We can't be dried up by everybody that wants a drink, so to speak, right? We're told that if we're happy when others are sad, there's a flaw in our character, that we're selfish, uncaring, or uncompassionate. Do not believe this. That is not true. You can be happy in some really difficult situations and still be a good person. Even if that's not your belief, looking at other people's experiences with a bit of like intentional distance, it can help you stay more objective. And so from that place, you can intentionally choose how to respond in any situation rather than react. So too often our reaction when quote unquote bad things happen is to become unhappy or experience some kind of negative emotion. And that's fine, right? I think we need to validate those feelings when they happen. But with distance and perspective, we can choose to respond and respond with happiness, okay? Or at least a positive emotion like hope or peace or love, right? And when I say happiness, again, we're not talking about, giggling like a maniac or, not acknowledging the things that are going on in the world. We're talking about a sense of well-being, right? A steady sense of your own self and your own contentment. So a bit of objectivity coupled with intentionality will allow you to choose your emotional state, to be happy despite anything going on in your life or around you and not to get caught up in that wave of negative emotion, okay? So how does your happiness and mental health or your well-being change the world? Some of this might seem a little strange to you, but I promise you that there's science to back most of this stuff up, okay? Or all of it, I'm hoping, right? So this quote here says, let your smile change the world, but don't let the world change your smile. So this is how our happiness can change the world. It's not just an emotion, it is a measurable energetic force that affects everyone around you. So when you're happy, you can affect the happiness of everyone around you. It's like a ripple effect of giving, right? It's similar to like dropping a pebble into the water and causing that ripples that keep spreading out. That's happiness. Happiness can ripple in that way, right? Out into others, which builds happiness throughout our communities, throughout our social networks, throughout our neighborhoods. So even a happy smile can change another person's day. There's some research done by Harvard professors that discovered that happiness of one individual reaches 3 degrees of separation. So that is, our level of happiness will impact the levels of friends and families and our friends' friends and our friends' friends' friends, right? So if you have a friend, relative, or neighbor who lives within a mile of your home and becomes happy, that will actually scientifically increase the probability that you'll be happy by 25%. Isn't that interesting? So that is a happy, energetic force that's being pushed out. So this is a big impact that we can make every day on the world around us just by understanding our emotions and the effect that they have on the world around us. Emotional intelligence, of course, takes time to nurture and foster, and our emotional state tends to react to the outside world. But with practice, we can stop reacting and start responding and being in control of our emotions with positivity and compassion, okay? So there is an impact of happiness on the collective unconscious, okay? And when I say collective unconscious, that might seem a little new age and a little woo-woo to some of you all. But if you think about our bodies, right? And how we respond to other people's energy, right? Have you ever been in a pretty decent mood and then somebody comes in and they just got the rain cloud over their head and then all of a sudden you're too, right? That's what we're talking about, that collective unconscious, that we are wired to acknowledge or feel or sense in some way the disposition of another person in our space as a way of safety, right? So just think about that as I go through this. So if emotions have a frequency, many people could feel unhappy or afraid, and that emotions will impact the emotional state of those around them. Ultimately, those emotions will affect all of us who live on this planet. So a pandemic, a natural disaster, war, terrorist attacks, massive accident, that can send waves of negative emotions around the world. Think about even just with the pandemic, right? How a lot of us globally were feeling very uncertain and scared, right? And that created a lot of turmoil in our neighborhoods because of that, okay? So if we choose to feel anger, sadness, horror, fear, mistrust, that will add to that wave size and that intensity. So by choosing to be happy, we help lessen the effect of all those negative emotions. So if you need a reason to be happy, that's a really good one. Of course, you can choose happiness as a way to impact those around you, but also yourself, right? And if you don't exercise your ability to choose your emotions, you allow your internal state to be dictated by external circumstances, by people, by situations. But if we exercise our power to choose, we get to decide how we feel at any given moment, okay? Like again, you can be sympathetic. You can be compassionate. You can see somebody suffering and be moved to alleviate that suffering, but you don't have to take it on as your own, okay? So choosing to be happy is a good choice, not just for you, but for other people. And it's easy to focus on the facts of our current world, right? And feel anxious and sad or even angry. And it can be seen kind of callous to smile or to be hopeful or optimistic. Especially if you're talking to somebody who maybe has suffered a big loss of like a loved one or a job or maybe their life. But we're not helping ourselves or anyone else by being miserable, right? They say misery loves company. Do not invite me. I will not come, right? So you don't need to be unhappy despite any conditioning or programming that we receive that says that we have to be unhappy in certain situations. No rule says that, okay? So we can choose to be happy. So why choose happiness? And again, I'm not saying that you're just choosing to slap a smile on and ignore your authentic human and justified emotions, okay? But I'm saying you're choosing to respond with hope, love, compassion, kindness, okay? So there's a Buddhist monk and psychologist named Jack Kornfield, and he says that cultivating a joyful spirit can actually help not only us, but the people around us, right? Especially when things are hard. So he's quoted as saying, our gift to the world comes as much through our being and presence, our smile and touch, our sense of possibility and the mystery of human life, as it does in the specifics of what we do, okay? So we, just by being a force of happiness, right? A force of optimism, a force of hope, that can do just as much for people as getting in the trenches with them, okay? And so this is a lovely sentiment, but it's also supported by science. Study after study shows that well-being, either being in a positive mood or recognizing that you have a good life, being grateful, that's going to benefit those in our social spheres, whether we're talking about families, workplaces, schools, or society at large, right? So when we're happy, we're better in our relationships, we're more kind and more helpful in our communities, and we're more productive in our workplaces. So all of that may be useful during times of crisis, okay? Our well-being is contagious in social circles. You ever been around somebody and you think, wow, her smile lights up the room, right? Every time I leave that space after I'm hanging out with him, I feel so much more happy, so much more optimistic, right? That's what we're talking about. It's contagious. So there's some researchers named Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They found that in social networks, happiness, again, can be contagious up to 3 degrees of separation from its initial source, which is you. So that means when you're happy, the people you're connected to tend to be happier. And the friends of those friends and the friends of those friends, right? They tend to be happier. So happiness contagion can also happen in schools. One study found that a student's individual well-being and happiness at the end of the school year partly depended on how happy and satisfied with their life their classmates were earlier in the year. And that can happen in homes and families and other workplaces as well. So why would that be? Well, our brains are pretty attuned to the emotions of those around us. There's a complex neural system that's often referred to as mirror neurons, and that means that we can experience the feelings of others inside of ourselves. So a lot of people say, well, I'm an empath. We all are, right? We're all wired for that. That's part of our survival is community. And in order for us to be in community, we have to be attuned to what other people are feeling and experiencing. So it's part of our basic biology. And that's what they call mirror neurons. So it's why when we smile, we can make other people smile. And when we laugh, other people can laugh with us, right? As long as we're in some contact with people physically or even just like online with us, good feelings will tend to spread to those other people, okay? Next, studies suggest that there is a reciprocal relationship between well-being and social bonds, and that strengthens both of them. So it's not only good for you, but it's also good for each person that you're connected to respond with compassion, with kindness, with optimism, okay? Our well-being will help us engage in social problems and help the world. Taking care of our own well-being may give us the emotional resources to help those around us. Again, that broaden and build, right? You're storing up resources for resilience when you choose to be happy, okay? So one study found that happier people are more likely to care about the problems of the world and take action to alleviate suffering. And it's theorized it might be because they have more personal agency and more energy to do so. Another study in Germany found that happier people tended to be more involved citizens, meaning that they voted, volunteered, participated in community activities more so than less happy people. Possibly, again, theorizing because they're more optimistic and trusted people more. Yet another study in Latin America found that happier people tend to vote more, and that happiness was likely the cause of the voting, not the effect of voting. Okay, so because they were happy, they went on and voted. They didn't become happy after they voted. So I think this is important to know because sometimes people will say, you know, how can you be happy when so much suffering is going on in the world? And or people that are happy are not aware of what's going on and they don't care, that they're just, you know, self-centered and focused on their own happiness. But that's not true. Studies show that happier people are more compassionate, more involved, and more proactive when it comes to alleviating suffering. Okay. So of course, by saying that your well-being helps others to be happy, it's not to try to pressure you to be happy all the time, because that's impossible, even under the best circumstances. And it's good to remember that all emotions can be useful under certain circumstances, including the so-called negative ones, right? So if you think about fear, it keeps us safe from taking unnecessary risks. Sadness can help us to signal to others that we need comfort, right? And it doesn't mean that we should simply put on a happy face when we don't feel happy, right? Accepting our negative emotions is useful for our well-being as well, while repressing them generally isn't. So we're not saying to bury your human emotions with fake happiness here, okay? But the findings in these research studies do suggest that taking care of our well-being is not a selfish pursuit. we can all try to do as individuals, we can all try to be positive as individuals by practicing keys to more sustained well-being, like gratitude, mindfulness, partaking in awe or wonder, right? Compassion. And that will essentially lead us to build communities and societies that promote wellness and well-being, okay? So by nurturing our well-being, we'll be helping those around us to cope and contributing to a better world for all of us, okay? And there are several possible ways that good feelings could contribute to building relationships in both the short term and the long term. So happy people are more likely to engage with others and be more social. When meeting new people, happier people tend to have more substantial interactions and feel a greater sense of commonality than less happy people. Again, if you're less happy, you're narrowing your perception of the world around you, okay? Happy people are less likely to have conflicts with others, and they're better at negotiating their differences. Happy people may be more kind and helpful toward others, and other people find it rewarding to be around happy people. Again, that contagion, right? So how do we feel happy no matter what? And I do want to say that I know that that's not possible all the time, right? But here's some tips that can maybe help you to cultivate that resilience, that happiness in your life, okay? So the first one is choose happiness. So this one also can seem kind of dismissive or kind of flippant, like, well, just be happy. Oh, okay, well, that was easy. Thanks for telling me, right? No, that's not how it works. But again, we're saying choose happiness in the way that we are choosing to be mindful of, the things that we're grateful for. We're choosing to be mindful of acts of kindness that we receive and that we give. We're choosing to set boundaries with people or situations that are draining or invalidating, right? So choosing happiness isn't about flipping a switch to suddenly be happy when you were sad or upset. Choosing happiness means that you are actively participating in the cultivation of an environment that allows you to experience happiness, okay? Next, focus on the things that make you happy. So how do you feel happy when you actually feel sad, angry, or afraid? Pay attention to where you focus your thoughts, right? Your thoughts create your emotions. And if you're experiencing negative emotions, your thoughts are probably on something that produced that feeling. So instead, you can intentionally think about something that makes you happy. Again, this is where gratitude can come into play. Mindfulness can come into play, right? I know for me, it's very easy to get caught up in all the things that I don't have rather than focusing on the things that I do have, right? There's a lot of people around the globe right now who do not have food in the refrigerator, who do not have a roof over their head, who do not have transportation, right? Who do not have loving home environments, right? So I have all those things, so I can focus on those things rather than the suffering that's going on outside. Again, that doesn't mean that I'm not compassionate and I don't care about those things, but I don't have to be unhappy. I can choose to focus on what's making me happy and what's going on good in my life, okay? Number 3, be sympathetic, not empathetic. So instead of trying to feel what another person feels, attempt to understand what they feel. Ask them questions about what they're experiencing. And so when you get to that point where you can feel sympathy or compassion, you don't need to put yourself in their shoes, okay? Number 4, be compassionate. So with understanding comes a desire to be of service, right? To kind of help people get out of that miserable state that they're in. So go ahead and help the best way that you can, make them feel better, and you will feel better too, right? Feel happy, and then you can help other people feel happy. But caution, don't focus on the outcome. Some people like to stay unhappy, okay? But you can still feel good about your efforts, okay? I have a friend of mine who's going through it right now. She doesn't want to hear solutions. She doesn't want to hear optimism. She just wants me to be a space for her to hold her vents, right? Her frustration. And that's okay. I can still feel good about my efforts, even if she's not happy when we leave the conversation, okay? And I don't have to take on her negativity to be of service to her. And then finally, do what makes you feel good, right? I think a lot of times we feel like we can't experience simple pleasures, right? I have too much to do. I can't watch that show I enjoy. I've got too much to do. I can't have that lunch date with my friend. I have too much to do. I can't take that long shower, right? Do what makes you feel good. That's how you cultivate resilience. That's how you build, how you broaden that repertoire of possibilities and actions, okay? So take a break from the news, take a break from caregiving, take a break from trying to find a job or grief or whatever you're feeling that's bringing you down. Go do something that makes you feel good. Have some fun. You're allowed to have some fun, and it's healthy to have fun, especially when you're experiencing a tragedy or I said tragedy. Y'all know what I was trying to say. So if you think about things like mystical traditions or spiritual practices or religion, right? They will advise you to go out and experience joy and be happy, right? And the state of happiness increases our ability to connect with our higher selves or our creator or whatever you want to call it. So in other words, being happy can definitely be a spiritual state, right? It's just kind of that energy that resonates in you regardless of the circumstances. So I feel like that was kind of quick, but that's the information I have for you today. I really hope that I was able to convey the point I was trying to get from the very beginning, was that happiness is a skill set, I think, right? And being able to choose what we focus our energy on, what we choose to focus our awareness on, is a great first step in cultivating that happiness. So let me go ahead and stop my share. There we go. And I will pause the recording.